No matter how many wars you fight, no matter how much blood you shed, no matter how much rage you loose, no matter how many demons you face, no matter how many companions you lose, no matter if our kingdom falls, I know that you will return to me in honor.
All right, how's everybody doing? We have 4 people in the chat right now. If someone could just give me a shout out to make sure that you can hear me, because I'm always worried that you can't hear me at the first of the stream. So someone give me a shout out and that'd be great. Today we're just going to do another promo stream for Krom the Destroyer. We have 16 days left before the campaign starts. And of course, you must sign up on the early bird page in order to get that free pinup poster for Krom the Destroyer if you are at all interested in getting that free pinup poster. All right, George says you can hear me. Great. Thank you very much. So let me put up some Krom the Destroyer art in the background. Just give me 1 minute and we'll put up a slideshow so that you can see some of the art for Krom the Destroyer, and I'll go back to the comments. But as I said, I just want to talk a little bit about Krom the Destroyer, and I usually start off these live streams with talking about some of the inspiration for this book, which I'm going to do again today. But again, reminder to everyone that we launch in 16 days on Indiegogo. And if you want that free exclusive pinup poster, you must sign up on the early bird page, leave your email there so that I can drop you an email when the project goes live. You know exactly when it is. It's the last day of this month for the 4th of July weekend. Other couple of things that I want to note is, of course, the link for that early bird sign up page is in the description. And of course, that will go right on to, it will take you to the open campaign when it finally opens. There is also a link in the description for ANVIL's Iron Age magazine #1, which is a in-demand campaign right now. And the reason why I'm doing that promotion for Iron Age magazine is because Iron Age magazine #2, which will start, I think, this summer, fairly soon, with their campaign for Iron Age magazine #2, has accepted one of my stories, which is a Krom the Destroyer story, which happens in a fallow period between 2 of the chapters of Krom the Destroyer itself. And so they'll be publishing that along with 2 spectacular pieces of art, which I had commissioned for to go along with that story. So there's something else to look forward to if you really want more Krom the Destroyer. And on top of that, I have another, I don't think I can announce it this week, but another exciting development with the Fourth Age comics. And a lot of this Iron Age, Comicsgate sort of milieu that it's all mixed up in. And I'll have some exciting news for you next week. If I start doing, I might start doing more than one of these live streams a week as we get closer and closer to Krom the Destroyer. So, if anybody has any questions about Krom the Destroyer or any of my books, really, you can go ahead and stick those in the chat. All you got to do is put a question mark at the end so they know you're talking to me and not just having a little chat with someone else. So I wanted to talk at first here a little bit about some of the inspiration for Krom the Destroyer. So originally, when I came up with the idea of doing this book, which, by the way, I came up with this and was really pushed to do it. I wanted to do it, but the people in the live stream, quite honestly, this was probably 2 years ago. People in the live stream said, yeah, you need to do that book. So I really was pushed to do it, really given a good nudge to do it by the people in a live stream like this. And when I originally came up with the idea, I came up with an idea of doing a Conan-like character, and it wasn't much else than that. And I started to talk to Jim O'Reilly, who is the main artist, which you see most of the art is Jim O'Reilly here in the background. So we talked about it, and we started to develop this idea, which was based upon a revamping of the idea of Conan, and really to take that character and to give it new life in a new way, which developed into the idea of taking the old Celtic myth, especially of a couple of very specific Celtic myth characters. Of course, Krom, which is an old Celtic god, and other heroes like Conor and Lugh of the Long Hand, Oisin, son of Féin, all these characters, which Robert E. Howard himself took and created Conan with. So to revamp the character with the basis of that myth and to redo the character in a different way, but at the same time, as it developed, there was more and more as I started to delve into the making of the character and really to work with Jim with this art, that there was strains of other characters coming out in this as well. Which again, the we just refer to the main character as King, Jim and I, when we're talking about it because he is a king, and really he doesn't. He's kind of like it's as with most of my books. It starts off like a man with no name Western. You know, you're just jumping right into the action. You kind of already know the gist of what you're getting with. That's what a man with no name Western is they throw you right into the situation because you're fairly familiar with such a situation. So this stuff you're looking at right now, these colored panels, these are from the first pages. Okay, you start off in a battle. So yeah, I took these ideas and I threw them together. And as it developed, there was strains of Cull and Solomon Kane coming out within this story itself. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Solomon Kane because it's a character I haven't talked about very much at all. Certainly not with the strain of the underlying strain of this book, which is Krom the Destroyer. And to give a little bit of backstory to this, I very much love the Robert E. Howard way of telling a story, which he connects things which you normally don't think should be connected. And there is a couple of, we'll say, telltale little bit of nudge nudge kind of things within his stories, which give you the idea that Conan is the descendant of Kull. If you read, I think it's the Phoenix and the Sword. There is these memories flooding into Conan, and they should be memories that Kull would have. Some people today would probably see this as being a reincarnation kind of thing, but no, for Robert E. Howard, I think it was more a racial memory. That's the kind of thing that he was more in tune with. So this is a racial memory that Conan is having as a descendant of Kull. And the same thing happens with Solomon Kane. There's a story. I can't remember for the life of me what the name of the story is off the top of my head, but there is a Solomon Kane story where he is pursuing this guy. I think it was one of the very first Solomon Kane stories. Anyways, Solomon Kane comes across this woman. She was at the side of a road just as he's, going down the road. It's dark. He finds her. She's been stabbed, and the place that she was at was just looted by this robber and his band. He's called the Wolf, if I remember correctly. He's a Frenchman. Anyways, Solomon Kane takes place within the time of the what are they called? The Puritans, right? So he takes this as a not really a personal insult, but as a personal mission to kill these people who killed this innocent woman. And Solomon Kane tracks this man who is the leader of this band. He kills every one of the members of his little team, his little outlaw band, and he just tracks them down and kills them one after another. But the main bad guy, who is the one who stabbed this woman directly, again, I think his name is the Wolf, or it's a French name that he gives them that means wolf, if I remember correctly. But anyways, he tracks him down and he's pursuing him for so long that they eventually end up in Africa, where he's hiding with this African tribe, where they see him as some kind of companion to their king, and they have this dark god that they worship. And as Solomon Kane is, spoilers, is held prisoner there under this altar of this dark god, where you have these black Africans, which is what Robert E. Howard describes them as, worshiping this black god through blood sacrifices. What you have is racial memories of a Conan story coming back to Solomon Kane. It is, what's the Conan story? I think it's Beyond the Black River, where the almost the exact same thing happens to Conan. And you see again within what is going on when he's in this position, Solomon Kane, that is, he's having these racial memories, which again might be infused to some extent by the supernatural things that are going on in front of him, because this dark god actually has some presence. It's not just an idol. It's some supernatural being, and there's a what do they call it? He's a magician, basically, a juju man, which they call him at that point. So there's a lot of supernatural things going on in the background of this story. But again, he gets flooded with these memories as, I should know this place. I should know this going on. This seems familiar to me. And what he's doing is, as I read it anyways, and as I read the Howard stories, he's reliving those memories, those racial memories of Conan, because it's connected to this dark god, which again was the situation that Conan himself was in. So, anyways, I see a connection between those three characters very much. Let me re up that art 1 second here. But as I said, I see a connection between these three characters, and that is something that I wanted to bring out within Krom the Destroyer. That is to say, I wanted a mix of these three characters in some way. Now, I still think Conan is the main character that it is trying to portray in a revamped way, but there is a mix of Cull and Solomon Kane in there as well, and a lot of what Jim and I have come up with ourselves as a backdrop from these old Celtic myths. But the one thing about Solomon Kane, which is very much distinct, I think, from Conan, which I tried to draw into, at the very least, the end of this story, excuse me, which is the end of Krom the Destroyer, because I do intend to make this a series, depending, of course, on how it is received by the people who buy it. It's all up to the audience. If people really like the story and really want more of it, then I'm going to give them more of it. I would love to do so. I already have ideas in my head to do a second one. But the thing is that Solomon Kane is seen much of a wanderer, but a wanderer with a purpose. Whereas Conan wanders and his purpose is not really fixed. He'll go with the wind. But Solomon Kane, again, he has a fixed purpose in destroying evildoers, basically. He sees himself almost as the personification of wrath. And when he comes across an injustice, he must avenge it. And so he goes on a mission. And until that mission is done, he keeps on that path. And he'll start wandering again after that. But at the same time, it's very much a fixation on this must be done now. And he'll track anybody to the ends of the earth in order to fulfill the wrath that is necessary, as I guess I'd say, as Plato would say, when one perceives him, when one lives a life that is totally and obstinately perverse and wicked, one must give free course to wrath. That's what comes to my mind when I think about the wrath of Solomon Kane. He is the free course of wrath for the vengeance on these people that is necessary because they're outside of the law. But yeah, that's the kind of strain that I want to bring into the end of Krom the Destroyer, the Solomon Kane part of it. And excuse me again. But there is this strain within Solomon Kane that gives him much more purpose than Conan, and I wanted to give this character much more purpose than what you would normally see within the Conan stories as they were coming out from Robert E. Howard. Because, of course, my first introduction to Conan was Marvel's Conan, and it had much more of a tied together timeline and much more of a progression within the story itself. The way that if you read it, you read single issues, you can read them and they're just standalone stories. But if you continue to read them one after another, after another, after another, you can see that he's going in a certain direction. And if you know the map for his area and his time, then the Hyborian Age, then you can follow basically where he's going from story arc to story arc to story arc. And it does influence where the next story is going to come from and what it's going to be. So I'm very much, again, even though I love Howard's stories. There was a disconnect within them, as in he would give you a story that's of Conan's youth and then of old man King Conan and then go back to the middle all the time. So he jumped around. So you can't follow it in a strict way. I want you to be able to follow this story for Krom the Destroyer in a strict way. Much more because, well, in my graphic novels themselves, there is 3 distinct chapters for usually each one of my graphic novels. Sometimes there's a backup story besides the 3 chapters, but again, it gives you much more of a linear pattern and a linear movement for someone who is basically a wanderer. So it gives them much more purpose. That's why I wanted to draw in that I don't know what you'd call it, the spirit of Solomon Kane, as it were, of the on a quest kind of. I'm not just wandering. I'm not just going to go exactly where the wind blows me. It might happen like that at times, but when something needs to be done, you're going to follow it. The character King is going to follow it to the ends of the earth. So again, this is much more of a grounded story in the temporal, which again is some of the things that I want to do within my books. If you'll notice, because there's only one book that's been fully published yet, which is Thomas Valiant. But again, the Valiant Heroes will be out pretty soon at the end of summer, first of fall. But if you look again at the cover of Thomas Valiant and then the cover of Krom the Destroyer, you'll notice that there is something underneath the little marquee in the top left-hand corner. And normally where you would get the date for when the comic or the book was published, what I give you is a timeline. And this is the timeline for when these stories occur within the universe. Because again, this is the for Krom the Destroyer. It's the prehistory of the same universe that Thomas Valiant lives in. There's not going to be any real connection between those two, except for again historical artifacts. But that's about it. But I give you the timeline. If you look at the timeline for Krom the Destroyer, you'll see that it's thousands and thousands of years in the past, and that's what it's going to give you on the cover, so that you can read these stories in a temporal way, in a timeline way, because again, it's just me writing. I want to give everyone a chance to be able to read them in a linear fashion if they wish to, and they don't need to guess what that linear fashion is, even though I'm going to be telling stories. Because again, one of the things I want to do is I want to go back and revisit some of the earlier stories for Thomas Valiant. We already have a backup story for Thomas Valiant #2, which was written by Don Chin and myself, which gave him the plot for it. And it's going to be set, within the early days of Thomas Valiant joining the Legion of Justice. So before anything that you've seen so far. So again, that'll have a timeline, which is in accord with when it's supposed to be, so you can tell where it is. I want to do a Pulse book with Nick Axe, who is one of the artists for Krom the Destroyer. The Pulse story will be taking place within the 1980s. I would also like to go back and do older stories, because both Thomas Valiant and Pulse are older characters that come into play much earlier than most of the other characters that you see within Thomas Valiant. I also have the Rampaging Thor, which is a book that you can get as a floppy or part of the Valiant Heroes, which is again out right now. And that itself is set in the final days of World War II. So it's going to give you a timeline of, exactly when it is. So that's what I want to do with my books. And that's one of the things I wanted to draw in with Krom the Destroyer. And again, with bringing in that Solomon Kane sort of reference to how he continuously is on a quest, and it's one that you can follow in a linear way. So anyway, I'm going to hand things over to the chat and see if I got any questions from anyone here. And if not, I'll just keep on rambling about Krom the Destroyer and my other books. So hopefully this is a sufficient way to do a live stream so that I can give everybody a time enough to I don't know, leave some questions in the chat, but give you a little bit more of an explanation of what Krom is about before we go live within 16 days. So let's see who's in the chat here. We have George. I think he was the first one waiting. And I just learned the other day how to do this, to put up people's chat on the main screen, which makes it much more easier for me to read. Okay. Manny, you didn't miss much. I was just talking about how everything was going on with Krom the Destroyer and how we were progressing with our story. Let's see. I'll go through a couple of these, even though they're not questions, just to start us off. George says the similarities between Solomon Kane, Cullen, Conan. Yes, that's exactly what we were talking about because I want to try to draw in that Howard reference of the connection between the three within one character. However, so I think they all have attributes that very much can be brought together within one character. Let's see. I'll scroll down a little bit here. See if anybody has any questions. Let's see. There's a question here. I'm not sure it's for me, but I will pull it up in order to see. Kenneth says, ran into someone poo-pooing the idea of Spider Gwen being revealed as trans in the future. Why is it taking the fans so long to realize that Hollywood is largely only there to break our hearts now? Let me just re-up that stuff in the background for a minute, but people, I guess I would say, Kenneth, that it's really hard for people to admit that they've been duped. Really, it's one of the things that people shy away from so much. I don't know what it is, but to admit that you're wrong and to admit that someone has tricked you is to admit a weakness in this culture that you just don't want to do. That would be my take on the entire thing. I This is why I have my channel though, because it was the mid 1990s when I realized that I'd been duped and that this stuff was coming out of Hollywood and the shows that I was watching, and I started to abandon certain kinds of media for older media and go back to stories like Conan and Cull and Solomon Kane. It's because I realized that when you have a long-standing, usually science fiction show, which is what I watched, they would rope you in back then with good stories for the first couple of seasons, and then slowly but surely this quote unquote progressive nonsense would start to creep into the story, and then all of a sudden by the time you get to 5 or 6 seasons in, if it got that far, it would just be straight in your face and not something that I really cared to participate in. And this was one of the things, quite honestly, when I got rid of buying comics, there was a financial element to it, um, but at the same time, it was very much okay. They're starting to put up comics to a ridiculous price because when I bought comics originally, they were a dollar or less, and that wasn't too much. But the prices just started to jump and to jump, and I said to myself, okay, I'm spending a lot of money on these. Why in the world am I spending that much money on something that A is preaching to me and B I don't agree with? So, I started to see those strains of things in 1996 or around the mid 90s, and the same with my television shows. It was like, why am I watching this? Why do I care to watch this if they're sticking something in my face? I used to be a really big Star Trek fan, especially Star Trek, the original series. And I sort of, when I saw Star Trek, The Next Generation, and there was these strains of things in it that I really wasn't liking, I just said, well, it could be this, well, it could be that. And I would let it go. And then I went into Deep Space Nine, and you got a little more of this strain of things, and then into Voyager. But by the time you got to, I think, Star Trek Enterprise, I was like, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm done. I don't want to be preached to anymore. But that's the thing. It takes a long time for people to realize that I've been duped, and these things have been sitting in front of me all the time, and I just didn't want to give it up. Uh, you're gonna put me way off track by asking questions like that, but I guess that's what we need for these live streams. Let's see. I'll scroll down, see if there's any other questions in the chat. Da-da. Okay, seems like George is having a good conversation with Kenneth. Let's see, scrolling down. If anybody has any questions at all, either about Krom the Destroyer or my other books, just stick those in the chat, and I'll get to them as soon as possible and see if we can get a little more discussion going on about my stories and a lot of the things that I talk about on my channel, even if you want to do that. So we have about 13 people in the chat right now. Again, if anybody wants to throw in a question, just go right ahead. So Let's see. George and Kenneth are having a conversation, so I don't want to be posting the entire thing on the main screen. But um, let's see. Oh, Sound Engraver's here, and she says, "Hope your week has been going well." Well, I had one heck of a week, and it's only in the middle of it so far, but a lot of work to do, and I'm trying to get everything ready for Krom the Destroyer. There's a lot of work still to be done before we begin our opening for the campaign. A lot of the art has been done already, but it's just doing, getting the Indiegogo page ready, which, I'm fairly good at now because I've done 3 or 4 of them, and I can probably throw it up pretty easily in a manner that's going to be enticing to everybody because I have the basic formula down. But at the same time, there's a couple of key things that need to be done and revamped and all that kind of stuff. I would like much more to give you a taste of the story. Whereas within my earlier openings for my books, I didn't have a lot of the print down. At the very least, for this one, I have the ability to go with lettering that will give you the first bit of the story for the first couple of pages, which I will be giving you on the Indiegogo page, which most of you have probably seen already. Most of them are shown here in some fashion in the background. But I want to do that. I want to give the story, and of course, the the story that is the print story that is keep being printed in the Iron Age magazine #2. Iron Age magazine #2 is going to go to print before Krom the Destroyer goes to print. So we have a deal. I have a deal with Iron Age magazine that anything that they print in there, I can print and sell myself. It's just after they have a sufficient time to sell it themselves. So I will be selling that print story again as part of the Indiegogo campaign, but it won't be printed, of course, until the entire book is done. And we're just working on the art for the second chapter right now. So it'll be probably a little while. It might be. I'm not entirely sure. I haven't gone with the date or fixed it yet for the printing date as what we're trying to establish, but it'll probably be the end of this year that will go to print. Or early next year, hopefully the end of this year, because I'd like to get Thomas Valiant #2 going as well. But anyways, on that front, I'm going to offer that story as one of the perks with the art. It'll be a different kind of perk than I've ever offered before. So you'll get to see some of the strains of that story because I'll give you the first part of it to read, I think, just as a teaser for what you can get, but I won't be printing the entire thing on the Indiegogo page. That being said, I've been having a conversation just over the last week with Edwin Boyette. He wants to actually do a reading of the story and put it up on his YouTube channel because he does readings of Conan stories. And what I would like to do and what we're discussing right now is to do the first part of the story since it is in a Robert E. Howard format. I try to copy that format as much as possible in order to, as I always say when I'm talking about art, you need to know the rules in order to break the rules. So I want to know intimately the rules that Robert E. Howard laid down as an author in the way that he discusses things. So I do that by imitating his story structure and his language structure within these first stories, these first print stories, because there's going to be more than one of them. And I'll take that, and once I do that, I break them down into, even if it's a short story, which this is a fairly short story, I break it down into 3 sections, like 3 chapters, although they're not as long as a chapter would be, certainly. So Edwin is probably going to record the first part of the story right up until the first break so that that will be available to people not only through his YouTube channel, but through the links that I will be giving on the Indiegogo page for Krom the Destroyer, and Iron Age magazine will be giving most probably. I can't speak for Richard over there at Iron Age, whether or not he's going to put this up on his Indiegogo page or not, but I would suggest that he put it up on his as well so that people can get a taste of the story itself. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of movement within not just Krom the Destroyer, but a lot of Fourth Age books. So there's a lot of things going on that, again, I'll have more and more news as the weeks go by. And this is one of the things that I love to do these live chats, because I can give you guys this news. It's pretty much exclusive for the news for Iron Age, stuff like that. I do post them on my Twitter, but a lot more people are here uh, on YouTube following me than they are on Twitter. I only have like, I don't know, 12 or 1300 people following me on Twitter, whereas I have, 21,000 here on YouTube. But again, I give you that information as things progress. And again, this is one of the things that I don't understand with a lot of these people that are putting out material right now that is independent material. Now, I can understand if you're an artist, why you are putting out one book at a time and trying to concentrate on one story, because art, I mean, I understand just how long it takes to actually get a full book done, especially if it's as long as something that I do, which is usually somewhere between 65 and 85 pages. That's going to take you a long time. Within the time that an artist finishes that many pages, I can write 10 stories. So the thing is that I can see why artists themselves who are trying to put out their own books are putting out, concentrating on one character or concentrating on one kind of story. But I don't understand why some of these people who are just writers are actually concentrating on only one story. Now, I try to tie all of my stories together within one shared universe, so that there is that way of understanding. I don't like the way that Richard is doing it over at Comics Matter. He's jumping around from universe to universe to universe. To me, that doesn't really give an incentive for people to actually invest themselves within the work itself. But then what does he care? Because he's making, $200,000 per comic. So he can go ahead and do that, I suppose. But for me, there needs to be that draw, and there needs to be that connected universe. Not that I'm going to ever make something as complicated as Marvel or anything like that, but I want to have people invested within the stories themselves. So I try, and I'm going to try more and more to write as many stories as possible and get them out there in as many forms as possible. Again, there is my graphic novels. That's number one. I honestly feel that the trailers that I make for my graphic novels are independent stories themselves. They do affect the world that you're reading about within these books. It helps shape the story and gives you some extra bits of information about those stories. I also, again, have things published now, or going to get things, excuse me, once again, uh, getting things published with Iron Age magazine and with other people within Comicsgate right now. We're having discussions about some movement within sharing a, we'll just say, character or two and things like that. So again, I'm going to start, I won't say spamming out, but getting out as many stories as possible to as many people as possible in as many avenues as possible. And hopefully that's going to lead to, the thing that I always wanted to do, which is to be a writer, even if it is something secondary to, my normal everyday life and how I usually make money. It's something that I do with my free time and I love to do. So if I can get a hold on this writing so that people are coming to me, which is already starting to happen, asking me to be part of my stories or asking me if they can use my stories, then great. That's what I think the future holds for me, and will allow me to move past, if it is necessary to move past independent comics, because the bottom could fall out of this tomorrow. Who knows? I really hope it doesn't. But if it does, then there's print stories. There's other things like the fact that I'm looking to get a novel published and things like that. So again, me just rambling on. So if I have any questions, anybody has any questions or comments at all for me that you want me to explain further about either Krom or any of my books or anything that I talk about, go right ahead and stick it in the chat. Let's see. I do have a question here from Fisher. Is it Fisher? No, it's Elijah. Says, RJ, who is the sword wielding blonde from Thomas Valiant based on? Well, actually, that actually ties into Krom the Destroyer. Funny enough, because you'll notice in the background here, there is a flaming sword wielding barbarian looking guy with a Japanese looking mask on. That's a character that Jim O'Reilly came to me and said, let's do something with this, and I said, sure, no problem. So again, as I said, Krom the Destroyer is the backstory, the thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago within the history of the Thomas Valiant world. So we have artifacts that will be presenting themselves within the modern stories, which you'll see every once in a while within the Krom the Destroyer part of the universe. And that's one of the things that ties the two together is this flaming sword wielding kind of warrior. Again, you're not going to get any crossover of characters at all, but it's an idea that is connected to the two. And when I originally conceived the character, I came to Renzo Rodriguez, who does most of the character development visually. I usually throw at him 3 or 4 different characters and say, "Go to town, give me something that you think is good," and he gives me 3 or 4 options sometimes for what to do with this character and how they will look visually. Although, as I said, Jim O'Reilly is the one who has given me most of the visuals for Krom the Destroyer. But this character, the red character, let me see if I have a picture of here. I'll put it up in the background. If anyone wants to take a look at what we're talking about here, I'll have to hide this, which is the Krom the Destroyer stuff, and I will put up. Let's see if I can show this. No, it doesn't show the background for it there, so I'm still not sure how to make it look like the background that I'm looking at. Only if I take myself off the screen. But the character's name is Cardinal, and let let me just play around here 1 second again. There is some Thomas Valiant art here somewhere within my StreamYard that I wanted to share with everybody, but I just don't know how to do it, quite honestly. Her name is Cardinal, and that's why you have the character in the red and black so much, because if you read Thomas Valiant #1, you have Kit Fox, who is basically a combination of Wolverine and Batman, because I wanted to go with an amalgam feel where you had DC and Marvel squished together. It's because I wanted to write DC and Marvel stories at the same time. I thought to myself, why not just combine the two, as if two worlds like them collided, as if the amalgam universe actually stuck together within, I think it was 1996, and just never came apart. And so we have it 30 whatever years later, 38 years later, and you have the descendants of these people now taking over as heroes, of these mashed together heroes. So that's where the idea of Kit Fox came from, as in those characters were sort of smashed together, and then it became a legacy character, and it was very much a Batman style character because Renzo loves Batman. He loves Robin. Those first initial Robin stories written by Chuck Dixon was, I think, what Renzo told me is what he first originally got attracted to within comics and started buying. So he loves Batman and Robin. So we created these characters to go along with Kit Fox, which are called the Jays. Now the Jays are basically, again, a takeoff of the Robins from your Batman stories. And again, it's because Renzo loved those Robin characters. So we made our own version of these characters. They're called the Jays. Although I know Robin in the Batman and Robin is more, his name goes from Robin Hood, if I remember the historical connection for his name. So I took a bird theme for those characters, and each one of them is a different colored jay, because there are different colored jays. There's blue jays and gray jays and green jays and all these kinds of different jays within just nature. So I took a bird theme for each one of these, combined it with ideas from those Robin characters that have been handed down throughout the years, and we created this team of Jays. Now, Cardinal, again, is connected to the Jays. She's connected to Kit Fox. She's basically we'll just say, an old Jay but one that never actually got into the practice of following what Kit Fox wanted her to do. So that's where that character came from. And again, since it is connected very much to the ideas of Batman, I took the look primarily from Huntress, but at the same time, I wanted to enter in that bird theme because she's a J. Well, she's not a J. She's a cardinal, and she took that name again because she's making herself distinct from the Jays, but at the same time very much like them. If you look at a cardinal, it looks well from my part of the world, anyways. Cardinal as a bird looks very much like a blue jay, but they're very distinct kinds of birds. So anyway, so I took the red and black from the cardinal, which is a bird, and that's why she's red and black, and that's why she has the mask. If you look at it very closely in the promotional material, you'll see that it has a beak right in the middle of the mask. It's sort of a very nice nod to the bird theme that she has going. Again, kind of like the fact that we have Blue Jay, which is one of the characters that was introduced within Thomas Valiant #1. If you look, he has a hood, and his hood has this little peak on the back, which again you get with a blue jay. Cardinal has the same thing. She has this little peak on the back of her hood. All these kinds of things. So a lot of visuals got brought into that. So we took the basic idea of Huntress, and then we tweaked it with the colors of the bird of a cardinal, and at the same time I entered into it an anime character which I only ever saw. There is there's an anime which is based upon a manga which is called Murder Princess, and it's an old anime, I think from like 1993. Could be a little later than that, but off the top of my head, it looks old to people who look at it today. Kind of looks like the animation you'd get in Zach Bell or something like that, which is an anime that I hated, especially when they put it on. Okay, I'm going to go on a rant here just for a second, but they put it on in place of Death Note after I can't remember it where it was, the channel that it was on, because the Saturday night anime stream usually went Naruto, and then Bleach, and then Eureka 7, and then Death Note. So there were those four anime that I would watch, but they replaced Death Note with Zach Bell, and I was like, oh, you people have no clue about your audience, do you? Anyways, but it has that sort of feel about it for the animation. But there's a character, and the Murder Princess as an anime and as a manga is based upon a body swap. There's a princess, and there's a woman who's, I don't know, she's more like a buccaneer, although she carries a samurai sword. But she has a sort of a pirate feel to her, and she switches bodies. These two women, they switch bodies so that this buccaneer gets stuck in the princess's body, and the princess gets stuck in the body of the buccaneer. So this woman, who's the buccaneer, I can't remember her name off the top of my head for the life of me. She only really appears within the very first issue, if I remember correctly, of the manga, and the very first episode of the anime. And that's the only time she has this very distinct look of having a samurai sword, and the getup that she usually wears as she is that character, because when she transfers into the other body, she has a completely different look. I very much like the look of that character. And since I wanted to base this character out of Japan, because Cardinal is trying to make a name for herself by being distinct from Kit Fox, she took off to Japan to try to practice her little bit of heroics there. And you'll get some of this, by the way, within Thomas Valiant. Within the Valiant Heroes book, because that's where we're introducing Cardinal. She's very much a part of the redemption of Kit Fox, which is one of the stories within the Valiant Heroes graphic novel. And she's also a part of the backup story, which is Detention. It introduces her and basically a side character for, I don't know, this book, but it is basically her sidekick who's named Artemis. So there's an introduction of these characters, but again, as I said, I wanted to give that Japanese feel to the character because that's where she's placed in within the world right now. So I took that character from the anime. And again, I took some of the visual cues from that, added it to the Huntress, and then to the visual style of trying to mimic the colors and the physical features of a cardinal itself, the bird. So again, I know that's a big old long spiel, but that's the first time anyone has asked me that question, and I really wanted to talk about that for a long time. So thank you for asking that question. Let's see. Was it Toonami? Someone says in the chat that it was Toonami. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. So we'll scroll up here a little bit and see if we have any other questions. Let's see here. Everybody have fun tonight, says RJ. Lots of great characters introduced in Thomas Valiant. I hope you can get some of them in their own books, but it was so sad when one of the best characters ended badly. This is what I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much. This is what we're doing with the Valiant Heroes #1. I don't know if I'm going to do this style of book again, because again, I'm not entirely sure. We did have quite a fall off from Thomas Valiant to the Valiant Heroes. There was only half as much interest in the Valiant Heroes. There's a number of factors that play into that. One of them is, of course, that the economy just took a turn for the worse within that year between the two books, certainly for the worse. And another one would be the fact that, again, Krom the Destroyer was originally supposed to come out as the second book, but Jim O'Reilly, who is my main artist, he had some personal issues that he had to deal with. He was moving cross country and all these kinds of things. So we had to put a hold on Krom the Destroyer, and I moved right into the Valiant Heroes because I had two artists already started work on two of the chapters, Renzo Rodriguez being one of them, the other being Martin Stevenson. And I had Mike Gustovich just chomping at the bit to do something else. So again, I didn't give that book as much hype and as much time for preparation as I should have on the internet. So there was quite a falling off. But again, I think part of that might be the fact that people really want the Thomas Valiant idea of one continuous story, because within the Valiant Heroes, you get 3 separate stories that are only loosely tied together. And it's a fleshing out of these characters. That's why I'm trying to answer this question in a roundabout way. But there is very much a fleshing out of some of the characters within the Valiant Heroes. The first one is the Valiant Hero book itself, which again shows all of the characters from Thomas Valiant #1, the main characters of the Valiant team, who are the Valiant Heroes. But at the same time, there's very much centered around the characters of Pulse and Feral. They're the 2 main actors within this book. Secondarily would be Disc. You do get a little bit of Thomas Valiant and a little bit of Phantasm, but not very much. So again, it is a fleshing out of those 2 characters and a building up of their relationship within the book. Because if you remember, if you've read Thomas Valiant #1, when Feral, who is basically a wolf woman, a werewolf, goes back into her human form, Thomas Valiant is not very happy about the fact of what he sees within her human form. Again, without spoiling anything for anybody, if you haven't read Thomas Valiant #1, and he's not entirely sure that this person can stay on the team. So we have within the Valiant Heroes #1 very much a building of a connection between the person who is basically second in command of the Valiant Heroes, who is Pulse, and Feral, and that deep connection is going to, I wouldn't say cement her place in this team, but at the very least be a counterbalance to the fact that Thomas Valiant is not entirely sure that Feral should remain part of this team. So there is character development there, very much so, and an introduction of those characters as separate from this team. There's also, of course, the redemption of Kit Fox, who as I said, almost exclusively focuses on that character of Kit Fox, who again is introduced somewhat as a villain in Thomas Valiant #1, and I only meant him to be a throwaway character that was a foil for Thomas Valiant. But as I always say, Renzo just loved this character so much and designing this character that because he loves Batman and Robin so much that he wanted to continue on. He said, please, 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 can we redeem this character so that we can use this character more? So that's where the idea of the redemption of Kit Fox came in. So we want to redeem the character of Kit Fox from his sort of villainous ways, or at the very least his, we'll say, indignation towards true heroism, or his hardening of his heart, if you put it that way, towards being heroic. So again, you get within the redemption of Kit Fox, which is the second story within the Valiant Heroes. You concentrate on him, and it's very much fleshing out his psyche, his world, his connections. You see that he has almost a shadow like connection within this world. That is to say, if you know anything about the character of the Shadow, you know they have a network going within the city that they live in. So it's very much, as I post on my Twitter all the time, it's a combination of Batman and the Shadow and Sherlock Holmes, basically. So it's a combination of those three characters who, again, I know they're all a combination or a variation on a theme anyways, but it's a combination of those old kind of detective stories for Batman and bringing it back to that, bringing it back to sort of like the Neil Adams Batman feel to this character who is a reflection of Batman. So yeah, and you get Cardinal and a couple of the other characters from Thomas Valiant -- 1 that are shoved in there at the major battle scene that you get, because you're going to get a major battle scene. If you're reading a story written by RJ Shaw, you're going to get a major battle scene. There's got to be one. It just has to happen. You're not going to sit around like you have Marvel and DC Comics right now and have everybody talking and doing a whole lot of nothing. So it's going to be a mystery, and it's going to be intriguing, and it's going to be straight up full pedal to the metal action as much as possible, and you're going to get a major battle scene. So the major battle scene within the redemption of Kit Fox does draw in some of those characters from Thomas Valiant #1 from the Legion of Justice, and some that you hadn't seen except for a very brief glimpse of within Thomas Valiant #1. So again, it's a flushing out the character of Kit Fox itself. Now, the third story within within the Valiant Heroes #1, again, which is an open campaign, which you can go pick up right now. We will be publishing within the end of summer or the first of fall this year, and you can go to Indiegogo and order that book right now if you want. But the third story within it is the Rampaging Thor. And if anyone has been following me, you might know that the Rampaging Thor is basically, Thor is a villain within Thomas Valiant #1. And what I have done with this character is I wanted to give a backstory as to why this character is who he is, because really a lot of people said, why do you have Thor in Roman armor? That makes no sense within Thomas Valiant #1. Well, there's a reason for that. And his reason is that this character has a history that we haven't gotten into yet. So I wanted to give people the history of that character, or the beginning of the history of that character within modern times. And that happens within his coming back into the world within World War II, which is what the Rampaging Thor is about. And this character of Thor is much more of a Hulk-like character than it is something that you would get within Marvel's Thor. Certainly, you have this character. Again, I always loved the idea of Donald Blake. I think that really, although Walter Simonson and Louise Simonson created the best stories within comics, as far as I'm concerned, within their runs for Thor, within their story arcs for Thor, getting rid of Donald Blake really killed that character for anybody else who tried to write it afterwards. So I think Donald Blake is the heart and soul of Thor. And once you rip that out, the character is no longer of any interest except for the inertia that allowed it to play out after the Simonson run. So within the Rampaging Thor, I have this idea, because the historical Thor is not someone who is heroic. If you read those old myths from legends of Norse myth from Snorri. I think his name is that, who is the writer, quote unquote, because it might be a collection of writers that wrote these stories. He's not in any way heroic. He might have been heroic to Vikings who like to pillage, but to us in modern day and age, no, he's not a hero. So I gave him a connection to the heroic in a way that he's connected to a Donald Blake like character. And it's a Jekyll and Hyde situation where you have the man who wants to be heroic and at the very least is struggling with trying to be that way, to be a good man. And he gets attached to Thor in a Donald Blake Thor kind of way. And Thor is just this rampaging madman, and that does work out well for some little bits of World War II. But at the same time, he's got to keep it in control. He's got to fight to maintain control in this Jekyll and Hyde kind of way, in this Bruce Banner and Hulk kind of way that you never would get with the Thor and Donald Blake stories. So it's a flushing out of that character. So I am glad once again, for that question that allowed me to just ramble on for 20 minutes. But yeah, flushing out of those characters, if you want that, that's in the Valiant Heroes #1. But again, I don't think I'm going to do a book like that. If I am ever again, it won't be for a long time. I'm just going to put the extra stories within the main books that I'm doing. So, as I said, within Thomas Valiant #2, instead of having an 80-page or longer story for the main story, we're going to have about a 65-page story for Thomas Valiant himself, and then we're going to have a backup story, which is going to flesh out the world and the characters, which is 22 pages, which in that book is written by Don Chin. And so I'm going to do that format for my books moving forward. Hopefully that will give more of an incentive for people to buy, because people are looking for longer stories. All right. So, well, I've been talking for a while and I didn't even notice it. Let's see if I have any other questions. And thank you very much, everybody, for posting these questions. Scrolling down. Rant alert, says Kenneth. Yeah. You can't come on one of my live streams without a rant. I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. I'm going to rant. I'm going to rant continuously. Yeah, it must have been on Toonami. I'm not entirely sure. I think it was rebroadcast by some local station that I was watching. So that's why it's a little bit confusing to me. Let's see. George says Death Note was a great anime. Hated the ending though. Well, I can't even. The ending was, at the very least, something that took me anyways, out of the story. But at the same time, I wasn't ready for it. I wasn't ready for that ending to happen at that point. So it did have a surprise element for it to me. So anyway, let's see. Scrolling down. I have someone saying they have to go to bed. So sorry that you have to go, but we will be posting this straight to my YouTube channel if you want to see any of the rest of this, if anybody has to go. Let's see if we have any other questions. There's a question mark. Chris says, thank you for sharing your talents and opinions. Oh, I got a lot of opinions. If anyone comes to me in my normal life and say, I want your opinion on this, and I say to them, oh, I got a lot of those. You want my opinion on something? I'll give you my opinion. Oh, don't worry about that. Let's see. I gave up on comics decades ago. I am looking forward to reading your books. Will there be a set continuity or self-contained story in each issue? Well, that's the thing. I'm trying to, again, have each of these set in the same world so that there is a connection between them all. But I want to have each graphic novel as a self-contained story arc. That is to say that if you are just jumping onto my book and you haven't read any of the previous ones, it will make sense and will be a self-contained story. So basically, each of my graphic novels, as I've done the first one and got the, I wouldn't say the second one, but because that would be the Valiant Heroes, which is broken up into 3 stories again, which, as I said, are loosely connected to an event, not connected within the characters so much. But within the other ones moving forward, I've already started writing Thomas Valiant #2 because Renzo's working on that within Krom the Destroyer as well, which is connected to this universe. I want to put in stories that are either 3 to 4 chapters long. So it's basically like buying 3 to 4 floppies, and it's an entire story arc, as if you would buy those floppies off of your shelf in the comic store, because each of the chapters will be roughly 22 pages, which is the normal size for a floppy. So again, you're going to get self-contained stories, but for most of the books, you're going to get a self-contained story that's as long as 2 to 3 to 4 um, normal comics that you would pick up. So it's an entire story arc. So it's not something crammed in there so that you don't have any character development. That's what I want within these characters, because you got to realize that I'm someone who just came off of writing a novel manuscript, which I had to pare down when my editor got a hold of it, from something like 400 pages to about 280. So yeah, I'm long-winded. And everybody knows that who's watched my videos. Yeah, I'm long-winded. So trying to get my stories into 65 to 80 pages is a task in itself. But yeah, self-contained stories so that you can read them separately, but it's part of a larger universe and a part of a larger story, so that if you want to connect them together, you can do so. And again, as I said at the first of this live stream, that's the reason why I put that timeline on the front of every book, so that if you want to go back and read them and you don't have them in order, or didn't buy them in order because you're just coming into it cold from, book 2 or book 3, then you can figure out very easily where in the timeline for this universe all of these stories occur, and you can read them within sequential order. Since I'm either the one who's writing all the stories or the one who's providing the plot for the other writers, because I provided the plot for John Chin to write a story, then these are all connected together, and I have them very much building a universe and building a world that you can engross yourself in. So let's see. We'll scroll down and see if we can have any other things that I will talk about before I got to go. Scrolling down, scrolling down. Scrolling down, George says something which I have to bring up in order to read. Is it still available? I got Thomas Valiant, but never knew about Valiant Heroes. Yes, George, Valiant Heroes is up on Indiegogo right now. I don't have the link in the description. If you will, bear with me just one moment, everyone. I am going to pull up something on my computer so that I can find the link for the Valiant Heroes. The thing is that, George, Indiegogo shadow banned the Valiant Heroes. You cannot find it unless you have the link for it. This is possibly why you can't find it at all. And if you go to any of my normal videos during my Saturday videos that I put out, I always put the link in the description for my graphic novels. So the link is there for the Valiant Heroes. And again, that has closed down the main campaign, but it's still in demand so that you can order it from the Indiegogo campaign. But as I said, since Indiegogo shadow banned it, you can't look it up on Indiegogo. If you go to Indiegogo and type in the Valiant Heroes, it will not show up. And I will give you right here. Let's see, put the comment. Hopefully I'm doing this right. Yeah, there you go. There is the link for the Valiant Heroes. George, if you're looking for that. And again, the fun thing that I did with the Valiant Heroes is, again, an experiment that I did that I don't know if I'm going to do this again in the future. I'm not sure. But since it is 3 independent stories which are only loosely connected, plus a backup story, the 3 independent stories are all roughly 22 to 26 pages long, and you can get those in floppy format as well in the campaign. So if you just want to buy one of the stories, it's $8. So that's comparable to something you get off the shelf. And you can just buy the Rampaging Thor or the Redemption of Kit Fox or the main story, which is the Pulse and Disc story, which is called the Valiant Heroes. You can get those as separate floppies within that campaign, or you can get them all at once within the graphic novel. The difference between the two is there's extra pages, not for the story itself, but for the Valiant universe within the floppies. You'll get a little bit of extra things in the back, which won't be in the graphic novel. And the graphic novel, it won't have those pages, but it will have the backup story, which is the Cardinal and Artemis story, which I actually got done by, since they are characters that are set in Japan, I had it done by a manga studio. So it is a manga studio like story. You'll get the feel for it. There's some art for that on the campaign. So again, the link there is in the description for anybody if they too want to go over and take a look at the Valiant Heroes. Sorry, not in the description, in the chat. So scrolling down, I'll see if I can get to the end of these questions, because usually I only stream for about an hour, but we'll go a little longer today because we had a lot of explanation and rambling from me. Scrolling down, see. I don't think. Well, I'll put this up, although it's not a question, just because I want to talk about it for a little bit. I like redemption stories, especially with heroes who have lost their way, as opposed to straight up villains. Villain redemption can be good too, but I think it can be easy to make it feel flat. I agree completely. And that was one of the things with the redemption of Kit Fox that we wanted to do for the Valiant Heroes. He's a hero who has lost his way. He's not a villain, although he does, play into the villain plot within Thomas Valiant #1. Let's see. Scrolling down. I think we have a question. Oh, Greg's in the chat. He says the Thief and Lady Hawk was based on the Grey Mouser. I did not know that. That's very interesting. Are you going to have someone like that in your books? I'm late. Greg, not within the first book for Krom the Destroyer, but we have, basically, if you're looking in the background, you see the demon woman with the large spear like implement within her hand, which is flaming. She's the main female character within, and the antagonist for a good part of the story within Krom the Destroyer. But I don't have a, let's say, a Bleat kind of character, or a Valeria kind of character, or a Lady Hawk kind of character within this first story. I'm certainly not opposed to that kind of a character coming into this. But again, I think trying to establish the characters that I have right now, which is, Krom, who begins as king. Again, there is a progression within his story. He sort of takes on the mantle of Krom as the story progresses. So I want to give people that kind of a story and that kind of a hero. People are really hungry for a manly man right now, and I'm sure womanly women as well. But at the same time, one at a time. But it will, if people want this kind of story, and I do more of these Krom the Destroyer books, then I'm sure there will be someone like that. Let's see. Tony has a question. Who's your favorite comic writer? As I said just earlier, I kind of answered that question. I think the honest to God best story ever written in comics would be Walter Simonson. And I don't know if Louise Simonson helped him on the story or not, but it culminated in the Destroyer arc within his Thor run. So really, honestly, I don't know if Walter Simonson could ever do that again. I don't think that he has as great a writing chops as a lot of other great writers. But to me, since that is visually and story constructed wise the best comic I had ever written, the most excited I ever was to read a comic in my life was literally reading that comic, that I would put him at the top. Even though, again, he's much more of an artist than he is a writer, and you can see that within his work. But yeah, I love Walter Simonson's Thor, really and truly. So, see if I have any other questions here. Oh, scrolling down. We have a question mark here. Let's see. Manny says, had to step away for a moment, but what show are you looking for on Toonami? uh, no, I was just talking about how I think it was Zach Bell replaced Death Note in the lineup at one point, and that was just a horrible decision to make. That kind of killed actually wanting to stay up to watch those shows, if you ask me. Sound Engraver has given me a super chat. Thank you much, Sound Engraver. I very much appreciate every super chat. And as I always say, as appreciation for Sound Engraver, if you ever want to think about or listen to some of the things that I talk about within, I say, cultural issues and fandom, and you want to do it in a vein of someone who has a musical background, you go over to Sound Engraver's channel and you'll get fixed right up with what you want right there. So let's see, scrolling down. Scrolling down. Let's see. Again, I am going to put up George's non-question here, but I don't think it's for me. But talking about protagonists and heroes, and we'll go to Tony's second question. What are your thoughts on Ablaze Conan comics? Quite honestly, I did buy some of them, and I probably will continue to buy some of them, not all of them. I'm not a fan of every one because they do switch over artists and styles of telling the story. They do have merit. They're just a reprinting of the Robert E. Howard story, so you're not going to get anything new, um, but you're going to see possibly in a new way some of the stories that you are familiar with. And if you're like me and you've read the massive bulk of Marvel comics, Conan and Conan the Barbarian and Savage Sword of Conan, you've already been introduced to these stories within a comic format. So it's just a riff off of something else that I am already familiar with. So they're an interesting distraction, and they certainly have some great storytelling for someone who has never come across these stories before. But if they really want to continue on with anything in that vein, they're going to have to start publishing something new, which I don't know if they have the ability to do so, because the reason why they're able to publish these old stories is because they're based out of Europe, and in Europe the character is a public domain character, and they're just printing them for free now. So again, I don't know if there's any future in those stories for Ablaze, but some of them do have great art and are great interpretations of Conan, and very much sometimes a different interpretation of Conan than you've ever seen before visually. Anyways, so scrolling down, yes, someone had commented here. George says, Ablaze, they call it just the Sumerian. They call it Sumerian in publishing it in North America, because again, as I said, in Europe they're giving it the Conan title because in Europe it's all those stories are in the public domain. The public domain for North America is different than the public domain for pretty much the rest of the world because of Disney and their shenanigans. So they had to make a deal with the, I think, Robert E. Howard estate, saying you can only publish these in North America if you change the name so that it doesn't say Conan. So I think that's where that came from. All right, scrolling down to the last couple of comments and questions. Kenneth has another question here. I hope it's for me. Let's see. Thanks for the inspiration. I've crept around this sphere since before COVID, but I have finally jammed out my first script for my own comic this year. Any advice or pitfalls for an aspiring writer? The best piece of advice that I can give, I don't know, you say it's for your own comic. So since you're the writer and you're writing a comic, for me anyways, the thing is that there's a lot of great artists out there right now. And I want to say, this is something that I wanted to talk about tonight if I had the chance. John Romita Sr. just died the other day. So, there's a loss of a great artist within comics. Sad to see him go. And if I am following the news correctly for other artists, also, I think about a week ago, again, don't take this as 100% gospel because I just read this on social media, but it appears that Barry Windsor Smith had a stroke about a week ago. So a lot of these great artists for comics are, just going by the wayside, unfortunately. I think it was we're getting into um, the last breath of these great artists and people who knew how to make comics correctly. So I wanted to say that because you see a lot of people on the internet right now. They're beautiful artists. They're great at doing what they can, but they don't quite understand. Even myself, they don't quite understand sequential storytelling as well as these old, anywhere near as well as these old comic writers wanted to pass on in their comics and make great storytelling through their sequential art. And that's one of the things I talked to Graham Nolan about when I interviewed him. He gave me some very good insights into that as well. The difference between illustration and sequential art, the difference between, what they would call, what he calls evergreen uh, basic covers and something that's going to be a cover that tells a story, all these differences and stuff like that. But again, this is something that was purposely done to comics. I at the first of my channel, 5 years ago, I talked about this over and over again about how the people at Marvel said they wanted to make a break with comics and the history of comics as it had been up until about 10 years ago, and they did break that line so that they tried to make something completely and utterly new, and they failed completely and utterly. But they made a break within the passing on of that knowledge from those old artists, which again is being lost now because these artists are starting to die. And the thing is that if you are an aspiring writer and you're writing a comic, you need to understand sequential art. Um, and that's a very hard thing to do. There are several books out there that you might want to take a look at. Um, but I would say, yeah, there's things, there's basic things like how to draw a comic the Marvel way. There's other books, I think from Jim Shooter. He has some, I don't know if they're books or not, but he does have lectures on the internet, which you can probably buy if you go to his website for structuring comics. There's also other books that touch on these things. There might also be some lectures from Klaus Janson on that as well. But again, that information is out there. Um, but the best way to do it is to read old, great runs of comics, especially something you're trying to imitate. If you're like me, I'm doing a Conan-like story, and I grew up reading the Marvel Conan, and visually, I want to take my cues from that. I just pulled out my Conan stories and started reading them again, trying to note the ways that sequential art actually plays together, and then listening to people like Roy Thomas give lectures or give talks and things like that to understand the keys to how he put things together and why he did certain things, like the fact that they wanted to make it more realistic, so there's no sound effects, all these kinds of things. So yeah, and I did the same thing for Thomas Valiant #1. I wanted to be very much a combination of the 1980s Justice League of America and the 1980s X-Men kind of stories. So again, I went back to those books and I read them. So and tried to pull as much information as possible from those books and then from the creators from those books. So it's very important to understand sequential art in order to write a good script, because unfortunately, a lot of these great artists right now are simply illustrators. All they're doing is illustrating. They don't understand sequential art. And like Renzo Rodriguez, he understands sequential art. Him and I understand it in a different way, and we play off of each other. But again, he's worked in comics for a while now, so he understands it. But there are some like the manga studio that I worked with, I had to basically, since they're used to sequential art in a manga format, I had to give them much more of the format of the sequential art that I was looking for within the backup story for the Valiant Heroes, things like that. So very important. That's the most important thing if you're writing comics, if you ask me. Let's see, scrolling down. I can't remember where in the world. Oh, there you are, Tony. I'll take you off of the screen. Or sorry, Kenneth. Let's see. Tony says, I was talking about Ablaze once again, how they can't publish in um, North America without taking the Conan name off. Let's see if scrolling down, see if we have any other comments. See if I can get through the last of them. Have you thought of Fund My Comic as an alternative? Excuse me, once again. Yes, I have, but at the same time, um, I am thinking about this in a small publishing kind of way. If you're someone who is making, like Richard Meyer, $200,000 off of a comic, or any of these older comic pros that are publishing established characters, then you can take a bit of a hit and move over to Fund My Comic. But for me, I'm barely making ends meet with what I'm getting for the funding of the comic, and anything that so for the thing was that for Thomas Valiant, we made around $50,000, which was great, great for my first book. That allowed me to pay for the art and everything that needed to be done for the book, and get all of the printing done, and get all of the shipping done, and use that as seed money to start the second book. Um, but within the Valiant Heroes, we made only around 20,000 to 21,000 so far within the campaign itself. So we made more than double within the Valiant Heroes, or sorry, within Thomas Valiant #1 than we did for the Valiant Heroes. And again, there can be a bunch of different reasons for that, but really the $20,000 will just cover what I need to pay everybody and get the thing printed and then shipped out. It may sound like a lot of money, but yeah, I am dealing with higher quality people who are doing the art, and it's not cheap. So $20,000 is just covering it. So if I was to move over to Fund My Comic, I would take a hit. Now I would love to do so. It would be much more of the place that would welcome me more than Indiegogo, but Indiegogo gives me, as far as I'm concerned right now, now this may change within the near future, but right now it gives me the addition of getting exactly what I need, at the very least making the very basic minimum to print the comic and then get it out into the world. Again, and if I get over and above, that gives me enough money for seed money for the next book. Because I'm not making any money off of these comics whatsoever. I'm either using it all to print and ship out the book and get all the art done, or I'm using it to create another book. So I get nothing out of this. I'm not making any money. I make my own money during whatever else I got going during my life. And unfortunately, Fund My Comic is just not big enough right now. It will mean a loss of revenue for me, which if I lose any more than I have right now, then yeah, there's no way I continue. It's just that simple. And it might be in part, again, the shadow banning that Indiegogo has put on my Thomas or my Valiant Heroes campaign. That might be part of the reason. I only think it's part of the reason. The rest is my fault, again, for not giving enough information to everybody, and not presenting a a product that was as appealing as the first book. Um, but again, I think I found a way to get around the shadow ban. At the very least, I'm going to make sure that, if at all possible, I have a way of working with the rules of Indiegogo and finding out whether or not it's shadow banned before I actually publish the darn thing, because there is a way to do it. Again, I love this is the way that I work in my normal life, by the way. It's not really life hacks, it's using the rules without breaking the rules, bending them to the extreme, but never breaking them. And I'm not going to break any of the rules of Indiegogo, but I think I figured out, along with a few people who have gone through the publicly available code for Indiegogo that you can just open on any web browser, whether or not I can determine before I announce to the world that the campaign is up, whether or not it's been shadow banned. And if it has been, then I will simply open another campaign. uh, because really, um, that's possible. And they're not shadow banning everything, because I know I put up a second chance campaign for Thomas Valiant #1, because I closed the original one, which that was a stupid move on my part. But I opened up a second chance campaign for Thomas Valiant #1, where you can get one of the original first printing, which is signed by me, and it's not shadow banned. So they're not shadow banning everything that I'm going to do. They're just selectively shadow banning some things, and they do give a reason for it. And it's partly to give you a kick in the behind, so that you do all of the promotion yourself rather than them giving you anything. I don't think that's a good enough reason, but that's their reason. But again, I just can't take that hit with Fund My Comic right now, even if it's just a couple of $1,000s. And I can't open up a campaign on both of them at the same time, because if I did that, then again, one of the things that people love to see on a comic campaign is, wow, this guy's made a lot of money. This must be a good book, or this guy's made a fair amount of money. There's something to this. People really want this. And if I'm making, $20,000 on Indiegogo and $5,000 on Fund My Comic, that might seem like a good way to go to Fund My Comic, but that's drawing some of the people on Indiegogo away from my campaign, because the more money I can make and show people that, yeah, others want this, then the more I can draw in more people. And yeah, again, I would love to get to that stage sometime, hopefully in the near future, where I can move everything over to Fund My Comic, but it's just not there right now, unfortunately. So, oh, let's see. Uh, I'm getting far behind on these comments right now. Da, 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 da. George has just bought the all three floppies perk for the Valiant Heroes. Thank you very much, George. That is something I wanted to do with the first book, but I never really got around to doing, because, again, um, part of the reason why I structure my books as in 3 chapters or 4 chapter structure is so that they can be published as floppies one day. But I wanted to publish these as floppies. So, it's going to be, I've been talking with my printer. I think I'm going to do it in what basically is the format that would look like a late 1990s Baxter paper book. So, it's going to be something higher quality than just newsprint, but still give you that old feel of a great comic. Thank you very much, George. Let's see here. Oh, I got another super chat. Thank you very much. This is from Michael. Do you have any solo story ideas for Phantasm? Well, here's the thing. I did have a solo story idea for Phantasm, but as the story developed, I thought it was basically, well, I guess it wasn't a solo story so much as there was a story that was a Phantasm and Feral story that I wanted to publish. And I started writing it, but then as I started writing it, it made much more sense to put Pulse in that role instead of Phantasm. So it became a Pulse and Feral story, which is, again, the heart of the Valiant Heroes story within that second campaign, which um, I just gave the link for it in the chat. So yeah, it was originally a Phantasm story, but it morphed into something else. And besides, it keeps on getting tripped up. I keep on getting these Phantasm stories, and something trips them up. I don't know why. That wasn't even the first one. There was supposed to be a separate ash can almost, but it was a separate story for Thomas Valiant #1, because I had, oh, who was it? Uh, I'm so terrible with names when I'm put on the spot. I would know his name off the top of my head if I was not trying to think of it. But the fellow who did Fatal with Sweetcast, um, he was supposed to do Thomas Valiant #1 with me. Um, but the thing was that it took me so long to get the story out there and to him that he started working with Sweetcast instead. So he just wanted to jump right in. But he was supposed to do, um, again, this was not a contracted thing at all. I don't fault him in any way. He wanted to get a book out there into the world better to him, and it pointed me towards Renzo. But again, there was supposed to be, in my mind, the way that campaign was supposed to go, there was supposed to be a separate Phantasm and Feral story, which was a basic prequel to, not really prequel, but a short story that would give you a backup idea of where these two characters came from in that universe before we got into Thomas Valiant #1. So it would probably be in the timeline like a couple of weeks before the actual book of Thomas Valiant #1 to see where Thomas Valiant actually met these two characters. And it sort of introduced Kit Fox as well. But that never actually got published. So again, there's these separate stories that would have Phantasm as the main character that I've done 2 of already, but just didn't get published or got published or are going to get published in a different format where I had to take Phantasm out of it. So I no doubt will have this character in future issues, but it won't be for a while. That is to say, as a separate character with her own backup story, just because we already have the backup story for the Valiant Heroes, which is the Artemis story. We already have the backup story for Thomas Valiant #1, which is a Thomas Valiant story, which also is set in the past. So it's the first time that Thomas Valiant meets the Calculator. So if you want to see more of the Calculator and Thomas Valiant, he will be in a version of, I guess we'll say, the backup story for Thomas Valiant #2 is set in the, I'm not sure, I think in 1980s. So again, when these two characters first met. But yeah, so I have all of those done already. And so if there is a Phantasm story, you won't see it until 3 or 4 issues coming into this. But she is a character that I will have to most probably within probably Thomas Valiant. No, sorry, within the Valiant Heroes #2, she will probably have to have a backup story of her own because she's the only character so far. Well, I suppose Disc is very much prominent within both the Valiant Heroes story and within Thomas Valiant #2. So yeah, she's someone I need to flesh out. You're correct. But yeah, it won't be until a couple of issues from now. Let's see. I am going to re-up the art once again. I need to get some new art. Hopefully people are not bored by this art in the background. I love this art from Nick Axe and Jim O'Reilly and who else we got there? We got Mike Gustovich doing the inking, and Henry Martinez is the name that I couldn't remember from last time. If you were here last week, the picture where you see King, which is the main character, and the harpies in the background, that's Henry Martinez. Henry Martinez, who drew what was it, Ghost Rider in the 1990s. So he's there as well. So thank you very much once again, Michael, for that super chat. We're getting down to the end. I have a comment here saying, love your channel. Thank you very much for supporting my channel. It is what makes my creation of these comic books possible. So let's see. Scrolling down. There is an interesting question that's probably going to throw me off into a tangent for quite a while. Question is, what in the world is your handle to begin with? Final unused. Anyways, it's strung together. Any interest in doing a comedy book? Well, here's the thing. The book that I was just describing, the 22-page backup story for Thomas Valiant #2 was written by Don Chin. and it is a not so much a comedy book or a parody book. It's much more of a, well, I guess it is comedy in some way. It's more of the early 1970s campy Denny O'Neil kind of Batman story. That's the kind of thing I'm going with. And I gave it to Don to write because I gave him the gist of what I wanted with the story and where I wanted it to go and what the major plot points should be and where we're going to end. And I wrote the final page myself to tie it into everything else. But Don, if anyone knows Don Chen, he's been around the indie comic book industry since the 1980s, working with people like Eclipse, and he is the creator of radioactive. Black Belt Hamsters, and he has those new books out, X Farce and The Beard Zerker, and things like that. So he writes parody stories, although he did write a beautiful fantasy story. What is the name of it off the top of my head? I can't remember. But anyways, he can do parody stories very well. So I challenged him. I said, "Can you write a campy story as in the vein of Denny O'Neil, Batman, for me for Thomas Valiant and the Calculator because it's set back in again the 1980s?" And he said, "Yeah, let's do that." So yeah, that book is a comedy in so much as, if you go back to those old Batman, which quite honestly, those old Batman I really detested as a kid, but as in the last 5 years, I started to buy them within my comic shop because usually I try to buy something every time I go in, and you have these old Batman. I'm thinking, yeah, I should buy those. They're not very expensive. And when I started to read them, I would just laugh out loud. Uh, so I could see where he was going with this campy kind of humor. Um, Things like the one that really struck me, the last Batman, one of those that I read and that got me to contact Don and to ask him to do such a story was I think it was Batman and the Riddler, and the Riddler was stealing the zoo animals, and he put them on a boat, and he was stealing all the Gotham Zoo animals, and the necks of the giraffes necks were sticking up out of the hull of this boat because obviously they're too big in this comic, and Batman is using the giraffe's neck to swing around like he's holding onto it like a pipe and then kicking the Riddler. It just, I lost it when I got to that panel. It's just, that is so, early 1970s, late 1960s stories for Batman. So yeah, those are the kind of comedy things that I want to do. If I could do another book, again, I would like to do another book with Don Chen, as something like the 1980s Justice League America, um, with oh those great, not so much comedy stories, but tongue-in-cheek stories. So yeah, those kinds of things I would love to do. But again, there's something out of my wheelhouse. There's something that I'm not exactly um, the best at. So I will probably lean on other people to try and get those stories out there into the world. But again, the thing is that you're only going to get a couple of stories in comic format from me per year as of now. If I start making more and more money within my comics, I'm going to start publishing more and more. That's, like I said, I don't make any money, nor do I plan to make money off of these comics. If I do make more money than is necessary for the publication and distribution of these books, it will go to a future book to be published within the next year, and I will use it as seed money to grow and give you more and more stories. All right, so let's see, scrolling down, we have a few more comments here. I'm not sure. That one was for me. Kenneth's talking about digital. Oh, good heavens, another super chat. Thank you very much. Let's see. Octo Commander has a $20 super chat. Thank you very much. That's incredibly generous. I don't know what I deserve, what I do to deserve all this from everybody. So thank you for the super chat. Let's see. From one creator to another, thank you for all you do. Well, again, I think that I got to a point where I criticized after 2 to 3 years the bad stories and tore apart stories and how these comic companies were destroying things. And I said, I need to either put up or shut up. I need to put my money where my mouth is and actually get stories out into the world. So yeah, that's, I think, what all of us need to do if we want to take back good storytelling and make it what it was for the world. And we need to support each other in doing so. So thank you very much for that support with the $20 super chat. Again, all of the money that I get from my channel, from the Indiegogo campaigns, anything, it goes towards creating new stories because it gives me the opportunity to do so. So thank you very much, Octo Commander. I wonder what the origin of that handle is. That would be interesting. All right, so I'm going to get down to the very last couple of comments because I've been going for almost an hour and a half more now. So we're going to wrap this up. Let's see. Greg says he's got the last question, I think, that I'm going to deal with today. So you're going to have the heroes riding purple dinosaurs. Not quite, no. The thing is, again, I want to make it. I always say that the tongue-in-cheek stories is what I'm going for. And my stories are always a reflection of reality. I'll go back to that Aristotelian ideal of what a story should be. But at the same time, there are just some things that happen in life that are make you roll on the ground laughing. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I'm a happy person. Most people don't really get that from my videos. They think I'm such a crank and that I just complain about everything all the time and I must be a downer in real life, when quite the opposite is the case. I can tear things apart and be so negative when I analyze things is because my life is just so happy and cheery. And so I go around just things happen to me and I just laugh out loud so often about the funny ways that life expresses itself. And I think to myself, if you're in a superhero world, I can just imagine how these kinds of episodes would play out and would be a way that would lighten up some of the heavier elements of my storytelling. So yeah, that's the kind of thing I want to pull in. So all right, scrolling down to the last comment. I said I would not answer anymore, but let's see. Long as those purple dinosaurs don't start singing I love you. I love you, you love me. No, we're not getting into that territory. All right, so that's all of the comments and all of the questions. I want to thank everyone for coming to the live chat. Again, I'm doing these streams primarily to talk about Krom the Destroyer. If you missed any of this, you can go back and listen to it on my YouTube channel. It's in the live section. So it will be posted there. Krom the Destroyer opens in 16 days. I suppose it might be for 15 days for some of you now. It's fairly late in the day. Again, we're going to be opening on Indiegogo in 15 days with Krom the Destroyer. If you sign up on the early bird page, which link is in the description for this video, you will get a exclusive free pinup poster with your order and be informed via email when the project goes live, which is supposed to be on the last day of this month, which is the 30th of June. That is a Friday, so it will be open for the long weekend for 4th of July. And again, I am going to close out this live stream talking about Krom the Destroyer by giving everybody the first trailer for my book for Krom the Destroyer, since the second one was played at the first of this live stream. All right, so I want to thank everyone once again for coming, and I will see you all later. Here is Krom the Destroyer trailer number 1.
An age ago, the beating heart of our people was a king who knew only victory. He wanted nothing more than an honorable death on the battlefield. Yet, none could match him, and so he wandered the earth, becoming lost in time and tide. Then we too lost our honest purpose, while silk-clad men sat upon the throne. But tremble now, all cities that lay under the stars, for out of the shadows and mists of the land of promise, our courage has been rekindled, our heart has returned, and the world will burn.